I'll start by welcoming you all at this webinar. Normally we do them in Dutch, but this one we'll do in English because we have an English presenter or a Chinese presenter presenting in English. The topic of the webinar will be health, well-being in health impact assessment, something that Xuan Chen is currently working on. Let's see, but before we start, I'll give a short introduction also on the academische werkplaats, academic workplace. And then we'll dive into the presentation. There are different academic workplaces in the Netherlands.
Mag dit ook in het Nederlands doen hoor, Tom?
Ja, zal ik deze in het Nederlands doen? Oké, nou er zijn meerdere academische werkplaatsen in Nederland. Het doel is om praktijkwetenschap en beleid te verbinden. Onderzoek naar beleid te vertalen en ook in ieder geval voor de academische werkplaats gezonde leefomgeving om de verschillende werknemers van de GGD'en ook een beetje een academische basis mee te geven. En voor de universiteiten om ook de link met de praktijk te maken. Er zijn meerdere werkplaatsen, de praktische invulling daarin verschilt. En de academische werkplaats gezonde leefomgeving is een landelijke. Eigenlijk alle andere academische werkplaatsen die we hebben, die zijn regionaal georganiseerd. De focus van de academische werkplaats gezonde leefomgeving zijn de GGD'ers die zich bezighouden met een gezonde leefomgeving. Bijna iedereen is wel academisch opgeleid. Dus we richten ons daarom eigenlijk met name erop om die academische vaardigheden die iedereen wel bij zijn opleiding heeft meegekregen, ook een beetje scherp te houden. Dat doen we op verschillende manieren. We hebben onderzoeksprojecten aan de ene kant en bijscholing op academische vaardigheden aan de andere kant. Wat betreft onderzoek, de academische werkplaats gezonde leefomgeving financiert en ondersteunt onderzoek. Onderzoek gedaan door GGD'en, dus dat is een belangrijk kenmerk. En waarbij de samenwerking wordt gezocht met universiteiten of andere kennispartners. Dus het kan ook zijn gemeenten, provincie, met wat daar de handige samenwerkingspartner is. Of onderzoeksinstituten bijvoorbeeld, zoals het RIVM. Onderzoeksprojecten, de projectduur is ongeveer maximaal 6 maanden. We vergoeden maximaal €20.000. Als er cofinanciering wordt gevonden van bijvoorbeeld een gemeente, dan heb je een streepje omhoog. Even kijken. En de volgende deadline, niet onbelangrijk voor het aanvragen van onderzoeksprojecten, is 14 mei 2025. Het andere stuk dat we onderzoeken, dus dit zijn de grote onderzoeksprojecten. Je kan ook een desktopstudie, daar kan je ook subsidie voor aanvragen. Dat kan bijvoorbeeld zijn een literatuuronderzoek. Die zijn kleiner van opzet. Het is een projectduur van maximaal 3 maanden. Daarvan vergoeden we maximaal 60 uur. En die voorstellen kunnen het hele jaar door worden ingediend. Dus daar hoef je niet voor te wachten voor een volgende call. Als jij daar een leuk idee hebt en denkt van, nou, dit zou heel goed passen binnen een korte desktopstudie, vraag het vooral aan. Neem contact op en dien in. De laatste slide. Dan hebben we ook nog scholingsactiviteiten, symposia, webinars. We doen 3 keer per jaar ook referaten, waarbij we een onderzoeksartikel even wat beter onder de loep nemen. Eens in eigenlijk altijd in aanloop naar een volgende subsidieronde proberen we met een projectenbrainstorm ook weer wat ideeën los te maken over welke projecten we zouden kunnen doen met z'n allen. Wil je op de hoogte blijven? Nou, schrijf je in voor de nieuwsbrief en volg ons ook op LinkedIn. Want daar geven we ook regelmatig even een update van projecten, welke nieuwe projecten zijn gestart, welke subsidies eraan zitten te komen, welke scholingsactiviteiten. Dus volg ons vooral. Dat is in het kort de academische werkplaats. And then now I'll switch to English. And I'd like to welcome Xuan Chen. She works on using well-being in health impact assessment. She's also doing other work on health impact assessment. But what we asked her for is using well-being in health impact assessment. The presentation will be in English. The subsequent discussion will be in English as well. But if you really want to ask your question in Dutch, then ask it in Dutch, and I'll translate. So we can have the subsequent discussion in English, and if necessary, I'll translate back the answers that come from that. The webinar will be recorded. We will put up the presentation on the website. The subsequent discussion will not be published. So don't hesitate to feel free to just pitch your ideas or your questions. I talked with Xuan Chen about what would be good during the discussions. During the presentation, if you have a short question just to clarify something, you can always ask during the presentation. I will monitor whether there are questions. Longer questions that require discussions, please keep them in mind for at the end of the presentation, and we can have the discussion afterwards. With that, I think I said everything that I wanted to say, and we'll give the floor to Xuan.
Thanks, Tom. Let me share my screen. Here is a presentation. Can you actually all see it?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Hi, everyone. I'm Xuan. I'm currently a PhD candidate working for environmental epidemiology and health impact assessment at IRAS Utrecht University with Ulrika and Herald. And today I would like to talk about how to integrate well-being into health impact assessment. Really happy to discuss this with you. Okay, so I work for the UBD Policy project, which is a EU project with the following partners here. And the work focus is to assess health impact, cost, and benefit of several urban environmental factors. And we do health impact assessment in around 1,000 European cities. We also collaborate with the following case studies here. With those cities, we do more detailed health impact assessment, starting from their environmental policies and the health impact. So briefly about health impact assessment of urban environment. It mostly starts from a policy or intervention, which will change different urban environmental factors, such as air pollution, green space, noise, or temperature. And then from this pathway, the health will be influenced, and the health impact assessment is to quantify the health benefits or health burden of those environmental policies. So most common used method of health impact assessment is comparative risk assessment, which include the following 7 steps. The first step is to define a counterfactual scenario, which is based on the policy of interest or can be a health-centered perspective, for example, from the WHO guidelines, and then define the exposure of interest and measure the exposure, and then it goes to the outcome of interest and get the association between outcome and risk from epidemiological studies, calculate the relative burden of disease, and then calculate the burden of disease attributable to that part of exposure. So here is an example of traffic noise policy. Here is a current situation. For traffic noise, there are different health outcomes associated with traffic noise. For example, annoyance and sleep disturbance. Those can happen during the years of one individual's life. And then it can be the health outcome, health burden quantified here is years lived with disability. That's the darker blue side here. And other health outcomes and disease can be also developed further in their life, which is also years lived with a disability quantified here. And then to some point, they reach the end of their life, which is mortality, and the darker gray part is the years of life lost. So that is health status of one individual. In health impact assessment, we quantify the whole population, which means there's different individuals together. So this is the scenario of current situation. And health impact assessment always start from environmental policy in this case, which is noise policy. We have the exposure difference between the current noise level and the policy targeted noise level. And then based on exposure response functions, we can calculate the health outcome in this population, which in the end is health burden measured by years lived with disability or years of life lost. And by comparing those two between the current situation and the policy targeted situation, we can calculate what's the health impact. And for the outcomes in health impact assessments, mostly used are premature death or disease. Those two outcomes can be added into an integrated indicator, which is DALYs, which is disability adjusted life years, or QALYs, quality adjusted life year. Here is a brief example of DALYs, which is a total years of lived with disability and years of life lost. And since it's health impact assessment, we would like to revisit the definition of health. So we visited the WHO concept, which is health is a state of complete physical, mental, social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. But actually, if we look into what has been quantified in health impact assessment, we have physical health outcomes, and we have mental illness. But then the question is, where is well-being in this case? So we actually explored what do we mean by well-being. And here we focused on subjective well-being. It's also called as personal well-being in some cases. It actually means the emotions and the functions. Emotions basically is emotional well-being. It can be divided into affective well-being, which is how someone have frequent pleasant feelings and infrequent unpleasant feelings. It's about how they feel. And also cognitive well-being. This one is on how they actually evaluate their life. It can be life satisfaction, which shows the overall judgment of their life. And another dimension of subjective well-being is psychological well-being, which focus on how they are functioning in the society and their life. It can be self-acceptance, whether they have positive relations with others, autonomy, environmental mastery, whether they have purpose in life and personal growth. It can also be resilience and more than those ones I listed here. So here are the definition of well-being and how it's actually measured. So a typical case is you can measure personal or subjective well-being in one question. For example, life satisfaction, you can let someone rate their general satisfaction with their life on a scale from 0 to 10, which 0 is the least satisfied they are with their life, and the 10 is the most satisfied with their life they can imagine. And this measurement is actually used by OECD. And here is an example of the Netherlands. So their sample of the Netherlands and people rate their life satisfaction average is 7.5, which actually rank 5th out of the 41 countries. And there are also questionnaire measures of subjective well-being. Here is an example of WHO 5 Well-being Index. It includes 5 questions, so it's a questionnaire, and people can answer those 5 questions based on their experience over the last 2 weeks. Most of those questions from 1 to 4 are focused on the feelings, and then the 5th one is on evaluation and functioning. And in the end, those 5 questions can be added into one score. So after discussing what is health impact assessment and also well-being, we would like to explore, can we actually integrate well-being into health impact assessment? And before we start doing that, we have actually 3 questions for ourselves. Firstly, is there actually a need to integrate well-being into health impact assessment? And the second one is there actually a causal pathway between the environment, well-being, and health? And also, is there any epidemiological evidence of the association between environment and well-being? So if the answer of those 3 questions are yes, then we would like to go to how to integrate well-being into health impact assessment. So we actually brought together a group of experts in epidemiology, psychology, economics, and also the stakeholders in different cities in the project to discuss this in a workshop. And here we have 3 arguments of we think there is a need to integrate well-being into health impact assessment. The first one is health is not the same as the absence of disease. And also, there's a positive aspect of health and well-being are missing in the current health impact assessment. And another one is one purpose of policymaking is to promote life satisfaction and well-being. And in some policy area, well-being is quite important, such as urban planning. And then we go to what is the causal pathway between environment and well-being and health. We developed a big framework from the literature, including different factors. But the center of this framework is environment, physical mental health, and well-being. So there's a lot of studies already quantify the area between environment and health. And there's also studies on health and well-being. What we're interested is actually, is there an error directly from environment and well-being other than from health pathway? And we also look into some literature, and there are some framework on the influence from environment directly to well-being. So after answering those 2 questions, we went to assess what is the epidemiological evidence between environment exposures and well-being. We started from air pollution. A quick search gave us 8 studies, not too much, and most of those are cross-sectional studies. And we went through all the conclusion of those 8 studies. They all found air pollution is negatively associated with subjective well-being. So we went deeper to see what are the exposures used in those studies. And here you can see it's quite different. For air pollution measurement, they have objective measurements for different pollutants and air pollution index. And they also have subjective measurements, which is perceived air quality or even air pollution annoyance. And for well-being, it's also different questionnaires or questions are used to measure subjective well-being from resilience, happiness, life satisfaction, and also the WHO 5 questionnaire. So what do those studies look like? I choose one from Estonia, and it's a cross-sectional study from the European Social Survey questionnaire. The air pollution of interest there is PM10. And the well-being is measured by one question: how satisfied they are with their life. And they actually, from this figure here, most people have good to fair health, but you can see those with good or very good health and generally satisfied with their life has relatively less air pollution. And they further did a regression analysis there, and they found their increase in PM10 annual concentrations is actually associated with a significant reduction in life satisfaction. And they further adjusted the health variables there, and the negative coefficient of PM10 remained with a slightly increased significance level. And the authors explain this by there are some direct links between environment factors and well-being, which cannot be explained by health variables in this study. So we further into other exposures. The second one is green space. We also did the search and we found 10 studies, which has 2 cohort and 7 cross-sectional studies. And the studies actually consistently show positive association between nature exposure and subjective well-being. Again, what exposure and well-being measurement are used? Among those studies, different measures for nature or green space are used. It can be objective measurements, for example, NDVI and type of green space, frequency of green space visit, even natural diversity. And subjective measurements are the perception of the quantity of urban green space. And again, different measurements of well-being are used in those studies, starting from one question to questionnaires. I'd like to give another example of what are the green space and well-being epidemiological study. This is a cross-sectional study in China from Chinese elderly people survey. And the green space is measured by NDVI. The well-being measurements are based on the questionnaire, including those dimensions. And here I would like to look at this figure here, which is a mediation analysis. And on their analysis, 95% of the association between green space and mortality can be explained by green space. However, there's 5% goes through well-being, indicating there is also an error between green space and subjective well-being. And here is another study in UK, which with a slightly bigger population, it's also a cross-sectional design. Here, the green space is measured by nature contact, and well-being is also measured by how satisfied they are with their life. And here is a figure you can see actually for people between have a visit time spent less than 300 minutes, you can see an increase in between their nature visit time and their high well-being. And after this, it's not increasing again. But before this, you can see there's a trend here. And finally, went to noise, which give us only 3 studies in total. They are all cross-sectional. And what we find there is all those 3 studies found local noise exposure is associated with well-being. However, they don't have any studies focusing on pleasant sound environment. So what exposures are used? Local noise measurement is an objective measurement, and they also use the perception of high noise levels. And the outcome used are life satisfaction and a WHO-5 questionnaire. And here is a really small study in Spain, and which is a cross-sectional design. The noise measured there is actually perceived noise. And the well-being measurement is WHO-5. And from the result here, noise from inside of the buildings actually is associated with well-being. And the noise outside is also associated with well-being. But here the noise is perceived noise and noise disturbance. So we visited all the epidemiology evidence in this case. And then we start to think how to integrate well-being into health impact assessment. We went through what components are needed if you would like to do a health impact assessment of environment and well-being. What do you need is, firstly, you need a baseline rate of well-being. This part can be get from the surveys or epidemiological studies. If it's a small population, we can extrapolate from that. And another thing you need is counterfactual scenario, which is the exposure distribution changes associated with policy. This part is the same with other environmental health impact assessment. And another thing we need is exposure response function, which we should be able to get from epidemiological evidence. And from the epidemiological studies I showed before, we actually found there's a huge gap in epidemiological studies, which should be provide us the baseline rate and exposure response function. And also most studies, so here is a gap, and we would also like to work on this, basically on epidemiological studies linking the environment and subjective well-being. So imagine if we have everything, every component we need ready to do a health impact assessment, what shall we do? So we have two ways you can do this. The first is you treat well-being as an outcome in health impact assessment, just like the other health outcomes. And then you can calculate the well-being burden, which can be turned into well-being adjusted life years. And another way, if you want to put well-being together with all the other health outcomes, you can actually create utility weight for well-being and add it in QALYs, or you can generate a disability weight for well-being, and then you add it together in DALYs. And here is the take-home message and also the point to open the discussion. Based on our study and discussions, we think there's a need to integrate well-being into health impact assessment, but we are actually really curious to discuss this with you. Is it indeed policy relevant? And if it's relevant and there are components ready, there are several methods possible. You can use well-being immediately as an outcome in health impact assessment, or you can add it together with other indicators in the end, turn it into QALYs or DALYs. And we also find there are more epidemiology study needed to provide better exposure response functions for health impact assessment. And if you are interested in this topic, we are really happy to collaborate on those studies. And also we here at Utrecht University within UBD Policy project, we work together with Utrecht Municipality on health impact assessment of their environmental policies. So this is also the focus of our work later to explore the possibility of integrate this in case study Utrecht. Yes, and this is the overwork, and I will happy to discuss. And here I would like to acknowledge the support of the UBD Policy team. If you're interested, you can also visit our website and the newsletter. Thank you.